1,350,000 years ago precisely, on the planet Bakaratini of the constellation Centaur, a decision was made by the leaders of that planet, following numerous conferences and reconnaissance expeditions, to send inhabited vessels to the planets Mars and Earth. There was a very simple reason for this. Their planet was cooling down internally and would become uninhabitable within 500 years. They thought, with good reason, that it was preferable to evacuate their people to a younger planet of the same category. You might wonder, what do you mean by the same category? I will explain later. To do so now would be premature. Going back to these people, I must tell you that these beings were human, very intelligent and highly evolved. A black race, they had thick lips, flattened noses, and frizzy hair, resembling, in these ways, the blacks now living on Earth. These people had inhabited the planet Bakaratini for 8 million years, in cohabitation with a yellow-colored race. To be precise, this was what you call on Earth the Chinese race, and they had inhabited Bakaratini for about 400 years prior to the blacks. The two races witnessed numerous revolutions during their time on the planet. The Auba tried to provide relief, assistance, and guidance, but, in spite of their intervention, wars broke out periodically. These, along with the natural disasters occurring on the planet, served to thin the ranks in both races. Finally, a nuclear war broke out on such a grand scale that the entire planet was plunged into darkness, and temperatures fell to -40 degrees Celsius. Not only did atomic radiation destroy the population, but cold and lack of food accomplished the rest. It is a recorded fact that a mere 150 black people and 85 yellow people survived the catastrophe, from a population of 7 billion black and 4 billion yellow humans. A register of survivors was taken just before they began to reproduce, and when they had stopped killing each other. And what exactly is killing each other? Let me explain the whole situation to you, and you'll be able to understand better. First of all, it is important to explain that those who remained were not, as you might expect, the leaders, well protected in specially equipped shelters. The survivors, comprising 3 groups of blacks and 5 groups of yellows, had come, some from private shelters and others from large public shelters. Of course, at the time of the war, there were many more than 235 people in shelters. Indeed, it is believed there were over 800,000 in all. Following months of confinement in the darkness and intense cold, they were eventually able to risk going outside. The blacks ventured out first, finding almost no trees, no plants, and no animals to speak of on their continent. It was a group, isolated from their shelter in the mountains, who first knew cannibalism. Because of the lack of food, when the weakest died, they were eaten. Then, in order to eat, they had to kill each other. And that was the worst catastrophe on their planet. Another group, near the ocean, managed to survive by eating the only living things left on the planet, which were not too contaminated. That is, the mollusks, some fish and crustaceans. They still had unpolluted drinking water, thanks to very ingenious installations enabling them to obtain water from incredible depths. Of course, many of these people still died as a result of lethal radiation on the planet and from eating fish which were filled with radioactivity. Much the same course of events occurred in the Yellows' territory, so that, as I have said, 150 blacks and 85 yellows remained. Then finally, deaths resulting from the war ceased, and reproduction began again. All of this occurred in spite of all the warnings they had received. It should be said that before this almost total decimation, both the black race and the yellow race had attained a very high level of technological advance. The people lived in great comfort. They worked in factories, private and government enterprises, offices, just as happens now on our planet. They had a strong devotion to money, which, to some, meant power and to others. Wiser, it meant well-being. They worked on average 12 hours per week. On Bakaratini, a week comprises 6 days of 21 hours each. They tended to the material rather than the spiritual side of their existence. At the same time, they allowed themselves to be duped and led in circles by a structure of politicians and bureaucrats, exactly as is happening now on Earth. Leaders fool the masses with empty words, and, motivated by greed or pride, they lead entire nations towards their downfall. Gradually, these two great races began to envy each other, and, as there is only one step from envy to hate, eventually they hated each other so much and so completely that the catastrophe occurred. Both possessing very sophisticated arms, they achieved their mutual destruction. Thiauba's historical records show, then, that 235 survived the disaster, 6 of them being children. These statistics were recorded 5 years afterwards, and their survival is attributed to cannibalism and certain marine life. They reproduced, not always successfully, as it was not uncommon for babies to be born with horribly misshapen heads or ugly weeping sores. They had to endure all the effects of atomic radiation on human beings. 150 years later, there were 190,000 blacks, men, women, and children, and 85,000 yellows. I speak to you of this 150-year period because this was when both races began to re-establish and when Thiauba were able to help them materially. In that particular case, Thiauba helped those people by intervening directly. Don't forget that the universe is a gigantic atom, and everything is affected by that. Your body is composed of atoms. My point is, in all galaxies, each time a planet is inhabited, at a certain stage in its evolution, the atom is discovered or rediscovered. Of course, the scientists who discover it are very soon aware that the disintegration of the atom can be a formidable weapon, and, at one moment or another, the leaders want to use it, just as a child with a box of matches is driven to set fire to a bale of straw in order to see what will happen. But, coming back to the planet Bakaratini, 150 years after the nuclear holocaust, Thiauba wanted to help these people. Their immediate need was food. Still, they were subsisting essentially from products of the sea, resorting occasionally to cannibalism to satisfy their omnivorous yearnings. They needed vegetables and a source of meat. Vegetables, fruit trees, grains, animals, all that was edible had disappeared from the planet. There remained just enough inedible plants and bushes to replenish the oxygen in the atmosphere. At the same time, an insect, resembling in some ways your praying mantis, had survived, and, as a result of spontaneous mutation caused by the atomic radiation, had evolved to gigantic proportions. It grew to about 8 meters in height, and had become extremely dangerous to the people. In addition, this insect, having no natural predator, reproduced rapidly. Thiauba flew over the planet locating the whereabouts of these insects. This was a relatively easy task thanks to technology that has been at Thiauba's disposal since time immemorial. When Thiauba detected the insects, they destroyed them so that, in a short time, they had exterminated them. Next, Thiauba had to reintroduce livestock, plants, and trees on the planet, according to the species known to have adapted climatically in specific regions before the catastrophe. This, too, was relatively easy. You may think that it must have taken years for such a task. However, it took just 2 days. 2 21-hour days. So, Thiauba helped these people materially, but, as so often when they intervene, they did not allow their presence to be known, and there are several reasons for that. The first is security. The second reason is a psychological one. If Thiauba had made these people aware of their existence, and if these people had realized Thiauba were there in order to help them, these people would passively have allowed themselves to be helped and would have felt sorry for themselves. This would adversely affect their will to survive. As we say on earth, God helps those who help themselves. The third and last reason is the main one. Universal law is well established and is as strictly enforced as that which controls the planet's revolutions around their suns. If you make a mistake, you pay the penalty, immediately, in 10 years' time, or in 10 centuries' time, but errors must be paid for. Thus, from time to time, Thiauba are permitted, or even advised, to offer a helping hand, but they are formally forbidden to serve the meal on a plate. Thus, in 2 days, Thiauba repopulated their planet with several pairs of animals and re-established numerous plants so that eventually the people could raise the animals and cultivate the plants and trees. They had to start from scratch, and Thiauba guided their progress, either by dream or telepathy. At times, Thiauba did it by means of a voice coming from the heavens. That is to say, the voice came from Thiauba's spacecraft, but, to them, it came from heaven. You might realize that those people must have taken Thiauba to be gods. It is exactly so, and it is in this way that legends and religions are established. But, in cases as urgent as that one was, the end justified the means. Finally, after several centuries, the planet was almost as it had been before the nuclear holocaust. All the same, in some places, deserts had been definitely established. In other spots less affected, the flora and fauna were easily developed. 150,000 years later, the civilization was highly successful, but this time, not only technologically. Happily, the people had learned their lesson and had also evolved to a high psychic and spiritual level. This occurred in both races, and the blacks and the yellows had developed strong bonds of friendship. Thus, peace reigned on the planet, for the legends remained quite clear, many of them recorded in writing, so that future generations would know exactly what had provoked the nuclear catastrophe and what its consequences had been.